There is a voice in your head that has been speaking for so long, you may have mistaken it for yourself. It comments, it judges, it remembers, it predicts, it worries, it argues with people who are not in the room. And because it is always there, you begin to believe the voice is you. But here is the fracture in the illusion. If you can hear the thought, then something in you is not the thought. If you can notice the fear, then something in you is not the fear. If you can watch the mind move, then you are not trapped inside every movement of the mind. There is a witness behind the noise. This video is not asking you to destroy thought. It is asking you to look at the one who sees it. Because the moment you realize you are not every thought that appears, the entire structure of suffering begins to change. Not because the mind becomes silent immediately, but because the throne has been moved. What you are about to explore is not a meditation technique. It is not a breathing exercise. It is not a self-help reframe with a new vocabulary. It is something older and more unsettling than any of that. This video will guide you from the inside of the mental noise, where most people spend their entire lives, to the edge of something that has always been watching that noise from just behind it. That position has a name. It is called the witness. And once you locate it, even briefly, your relationship with anxiety, criticism, memory, and identity will begin to shift in ways you cannot fully predict in advance. You will see through what follows how the mind turns temporary thoughts into permanent identities. You will understand how a passing fear becomes a fixed belief about who you are. You will trace the invisible thread between an anxious thought and a paralyzed life. And then, carefully, you will begin to feel the thing that was watching all of it. Not as a concept, not as philosophy, but as a living position inside your own awareness that has been available to you the entire time, even when you were most lost inside the noise. The promise this video makes is not transformation through effort. It is recognition through clarity. You do not have to build the witness. You only have to notice that it was already there. That subtle shift, from being inside the thought to being behind it, is not the end of your inner work. It is the beginning of the only kind of inner work that actually reaches the root. You have been taught, without anyone saying it directly, that your thoughts are you. When a fearful thought arrives, it feels like a fact about reality. When a critical thought arrives, it feels like an honest assessment of your worth. When a dark thought arrives at 3 in the morning, it feels like prophecy. And so you take these thoughts seriously. You obey them, you defend yourself against them or surrender to them. You negotiate with them. You build your life around the ones that repeat the loudest. But no one ever stopped to ask the foundational question. Who told you that you are required to believe every thought that crosses your mind? A thought is an appearance. It arises, it moves, it dissolves, like weather, like a sound passing through a room. The mind does not generate thoughts the way a factory generates products, carefully with quality control. The mind generates thoughts the way a river generates ripples, constantly, automatically, without consulting you about what it produces. You do not choose your thoughts. They arrive, and yet, because you have never been shown the difference between the thought that arrives and the awareness in which it arrives, you treat every ripple as if it were the river itself. Here is what changes everything. Awareness is not the same thing as thinking. You can be aware of a thought without becoming the thought. You can observe jealousy without becoming a jealous person. You can notice a violent mental image without being violent. You can hear the inner critic without agreeing with it, without fighting it, and without needing to fix it before you can move. The thought and the awareness of the thought exist at two completely different levels. Most people live entirely on the first level. This video is an invitation to the second. So before anything else, before the history, before the mechanism, before the practice, try this. Right now, as you listen, notice that you are listening. There is a thought arising in response to these words, and there is something that notices that thought arising. That noticing, quiet, effortless, already present, is not another thought. It does not have an opinion. It does not argue. It does not panic. It simply sees. Whatever you call it, whatever tradition you attach to it or refuse to attach to it, that seeing is real. It is happening right now, and it has been happening far longer than the voice has been talking. Most people, when they begin to recognize that something is wrong inside their inner life, arrive at a very specific and very common conclusion. They tell themselves, I am an anxious person. I am a negative thinker. I am someone who overthinks everything. I am broken. I am not like people who seem calm or clear. They look at the patterns of their mind and they do what humans always do with repeating patterns. They turn the pattern into a noun. They turn the behavior into an identity. And once that identity is formed, it becomes the lens through which every new thought is filtered. The anxious person expects anxiety. The negative thinker expects negativity. And so the pattern feeds itself, because the identity makes the next thought feel like confirmation of what was already true. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a flaw in the instruction you are given about the nature of the mind. You were never shown that a thought is temporary and that you are not. You were never shown that the emotion passing through you is a signal, not a sentence. And without that distinction, it is completely logical to look at a recurring thought and conclude that the thought is describing your nature. If the same critical voice has spoken every day for 30 years, it is reasonable from the inside of the experience to believe that the criticism is accurate. But reasonable and true are not always the same thing. Watch how it works in daily life. Something happens. A rejection, a mistake, a moment of failure. The mind immediately generates a narrative. The narrative is almost never just about the event. It reaches backward into memory and forward into prediction. It says, this happened because of who you fundamentally are. And then it offers evidence. All the other times this happened, all the patterns that prove the diagnosis, all the ways the future is likely to confirm what the mind has already decided. And you, standing inside the thought, cannot see that the entire case is being built, prosecuted, and judged by the same closed system. There is no external truth being delivered. There is only the mind generating a story and then treating that story as a file stamped with the word reality. The word that matters here is identification. To identify with a thought means to collapse the distance between you and the thought until there is no gap left, until the thought is not something you are having, but something you are. When you are fully identified with a thought, you cannot question it, because there is no position left outside the thought from which to observe it. You are inside it. You are it. This is why people can know abstractly that their inner critic is irrational and still feel completely crushed by it. The knowing is intellectual. The identification is total, and knowledge alone does not dissolve identification. The tragedy, and that is the precise word for it, is that most people do not realize what has been lost. They have forgotten that there was ever a position available to them that was not inside the mental noise. They have lived so long inside the commentary that the commentary feels like the ground itself. They do not know they are inside a thought because the thought has become the entire perceptual world. This is what ancient traditions meant when they described the mind as a veil, not a metaphor about mystical escape. A precise description of what happens when awareness contracts so fully into mental content that it loses the memory of its own spaciousness. And so the person continues. They manage the thoughts, they argue with the thoughts, they distract themselves from the thoughts, they seek validation against the thoughts, they medicate the thoughts, they exhaust themselves trying to produce better thoughts to replace the bad ones. All of this is activity happening inside the loop. None of it is standing outside the loop and watching it, because standing outside requires knowing that outside is possible. And that is exactly what most people were never taught. Here is the first crack in the story. If you truly were your thoughts, you would be a completely different person every few minutes. Your thoughts change constantly. In the space of a single hour, you may think you are worthless and then think you are capable. You may think the relationship is doomed and then feel warmth toward the same person. You may believe the future is terrifying and then, watching something beautiful, forget the future entirely. The thoughts contradict each other. They shift, they reverse, they dissolve and reform. And yet, through all of that movement, something in you remains. Something watches the worthlessness thought arrive and then watches it leave. Something was present for the warmth and also present for the fear. If you were the thoughts, you would vanish when the thoughts change. But you do not vanish. This is the logical fracture that most people never fully press on. The content of the mind is unstable. It is constantly in motion. But the awareness in which that content appears is not in motion in the same way. It is the space in which the motion is happening. Think of a cinema screen. Images appear on the screen, violent, tender, dark, bright. The images move, they change. They generate emotion in the audience. But the screen itself is untouched by every image projected onto it. It does not become the fire when fire appears. It does not become the darkness when the lights go out. The screen is the condition for the images, not one of the images itself. Awareness is not a perfect metaphor, but this one points at something real. The mind moves through you, but you are not the movement. The reason the common explanation fails, the one that says you are an anxious, broken, or negative person, is that it takes a temporary condition and declares it a permanent structure. Anxiety is a state that moves through awareness. Depression is a weather pattern in the mind-body field. Negative thought loops are grooves worn into a nervous system by repetition and fear. None of these are the bedrock of what you are. They are appearances, intense appearances, sometimes overwhelming appearances, appearances that shape behavior and steal years of life. But appearances, nonetheless. The mistake is in the classification. When you classify a recurring appearance as your identity, you stop looking for the one who is watching the appearance. Consider this contrast. You have certainly had the experience of watching your own mind in the way that you sometimes watch a conversation you are not fully part of. A moment where you suddenly hear yourself talking and you observe what you are saying from a slight distance. Or a moment where a fear arises and before you are completely inside it, there is a split second of seeing it from just outside. That split second is not an accident. It is not a malfunction. It is a glimpse of the witness. It is awareness briefly recognizing itself as separate from the content passing through it. Most people dismiss that moment as meaningless. This video is asking you to consider that it may be the most important moment available to you. Thoughts change constantly. But here is what does not change: the capacity to observe. Right now, your thoughts about what you heard 2 paragraphs ago are different from what they were in the moment of hearing it. The mental content has moved, but the observer, the one receiving this narration, registering these words, noticing what arises in response, that observer has not relocated. It has not changed addresses. It has been steady throughout the entire experience of this video, just as it was steady throughout the chaos of yesterday and the silence before you woke up this morning. The observer is not made of thought. It is not generated by thought. It is the container in which thought appears. The deeper failure of the common explanation is this: it offers no exit. If you are truly your thoughts, then you are trapped inside whatever the mind produces. There is no position available to you that is outside the content. The only tool you have is more thought, which is trying to use the instrument to repair the instrument. But if you are not the thoughts, if you are the awareness behind them, then there is always a position available. There is always a place to stand that is not inside the storm. Not a place that makes the storm disappear. Not a spiritual bypass that avoids difficulty. A position that allows you to see the storm clearly without being destroyed by every movement it makes. That position exists. It has always existed, and you have touched it more times than you realize. If something in you just shifted, even slightly, if you can feel, even as a faint sensation somewhere in the body, the difference between the thought that is moving and the awareness that is watching it move, then you are already touching the thing this entire video is pointing toward. It does not have to be a dramatic experience. It does not have to feel mystical or complete. Even a small gap, even a hairline fracture between the voice and the one who hears the voice is enough. That gap is the beginning of everything. Write, "I am the witness," in the comments right now. Not as a declaration of arrival, not as a spiritual claim, as a moment of recognition, as a marker that says, "I noticed the separation even briefly, and I am willing to keep looking." The comments will be a record of everyone who stopped for just a moment and saw behind the noise. You are not alone in this territory. Others are finding their way to the same edge. Let them know you are here. Long before psychology had language for it, before neuroscience could map the circuits of self-referential thought, before philosophy developed its careful frameworks for consciousness, human beings in vastly different parts of the world arrived at the same discovery. They arrived at it through meditation, through contemplative prayer, through ritual silence, through the extreme discipline of ascetic practice, through the quiet exhaustion of suffering long enough to finally stop fighting. And what they found, written into the texts of India, encoded in the Stoic exercises of ancient Greece, embedded in the mystical branches of every major tradition, was the same essential pattern. The mind is not the self. Something watches the mind. And that something is closer to what you actually are than any thought the mind has ever produced. In the Vedic traditions of ancient India, this principle was described with a precision that still stands after thousands of years. The concept of Sakshi, the witness, referred to the pure, observing awareness that stands behind all experience. Not a god, not a soul requiring doctrine, a function of consciousness itself. The witness does not judge. It does not prefer. It does not age when the body ages, or despair when the emotions despair. It is the constant in the equation, the stable element around which all the variables of thought, emotion, sensation, and memory move. Ancient teachers did not present this as a belief to be adopted. They presented it as a direct discovery to be made right now inside your own experience. In the Stoic tradition of ancient Greece and Rome, the same discovery arrived in different clothes. The Stoics made a foundational distinction between what is within our power and what is not. And at the center of what is within your power, they placed not your circumstances, not your emotions as they arise, not even your initial thoughts, but your relationship to those thoughts. The word they used was prohairesis, the faculty of choice about how to orient the inner life in response to what arises. This is not the power to stop thought. It is the power to step back from thought and choose the angle of response. That step back requires a witness, requires something in you that is not fully absorbed in the content of the moment. The Buddhist tradition went even further into the mechanics of this. The teaching of anatta, often translated as non-self, points at the same pattern from a different direction. It observes that what most people call self is actually a cluster of changing processes: thought, sensation, perception, memory, and emotional reaction, all moving, none of them permanent. And yet, through the entire investigation, there is investigation happening. There is awareness, not a fixed self, not an immortal soul the tradition can define with certainty, but awareness, lucid, present, and untangled from the content passing through it. The meditator is not asked to believe in this. The meditator is asked to sit down, become quiet, and look directly at what is actually happening inside experience right now. Across these traditions and many others, Sufi contemplative practice, the apophatic mysticism of certain Christian lineages, the introspective disciplines of Taoism, the same structure appears. There is the content of experience, and there is something that receives the content. There is the scene, and there is the seer. There is the play, and there is the theater in which the play takes place. Every tradition frames it differently. Every tradition has its own vocabulary for what the witness is or is not. But the discovery beneath the vocabulary is consistent across millennia and across cultures that had no contact with one another. That consistency is not proof of metaphysics. It is evidence of a pattern so deeply embedded in human consciousness that independent observers, separated by oceans and centuries, encountered the same inner structure. What this means for you is not that you must adopt a tradition. It means that what you are being shown in this video is not a modern invention, not a self-help repackaging, not a philosophical abstraction created in a laboratory. It is the oldest map available to a human being trying to understand the inner life. The ancient explorers walked this territory without the benefit of modern neuroscience. They mapped it with the only instrument they had: sustained, honest, undistracted attention. And what they brought back from that exploration is a map that points always to the same discovery. Behind the noise, there is a silence that watches. Behind the movement, there is a stillness that receives. Behind the mask of thought, there is a witness that has never been confused, even when you were. The reason this pattern persisted is not religious authority. Authority can maintain a doctrine, but it cannot generate a genuine inner discovery across cultures and centuries independently. The reason the witness principle persisted is because it works. Because when a human being actually turns their attention toward the observer rather than the observed, something shifts that no amount of intellectual argument could produce. The ancient teachers did not pass down theories. They passed down instructions. Sit, look, notice what notices. Stop running from the contents of the mind long enough to find the one who is watching the running. That instruction has survived because when followed honestly, it produces a recognizable result. It is worth pausing on what the ancient traditions were not saying. They were not saying the mind is the enemy. They were not saying thought is evil. They were not saying that emotions must be suppressed or that the body must be transcended. The witness is not a cold, detached mechanism of denial. It is not a strategy for avoiding life. In almost every tradition that maps it clearly, the witness is described as the ground from which compassion, clarity, and genuine engagement with life become possible. It is not the end of feeling. It is the beginning of feeling without being enslaved by every sensation that arrives. And that distinction between feeling and being enslaved by feeling is one of the most important distinctions a human life can reach. There is something that the ancient maps understood intuitively, and that modern study of the body-mind connection has been slowly confirming through a different set of instruments. Thought and body are not separate systems. They are one continuous loop. A thought arises. The body responds with a chemical shift, a muscular contraction, a change in breathing, a tightening in the chest or the throat. And then that bodily state generates a new current of thought, colored by the physical signature of the emotion. The body does not simply receive the thought and then return to neutral. The body holds the thought as sensation, and sensation influences the next thought. And the next. The loop runs, and most people are completely inside it, with no awareness that a loop is what they are inside. You have felt this. You have had the experience of waking up anxious before a thought about the source of anxiety has even fully formed. The body was already in the state. The nervous system was already activated. And then the mind rushed in to provide a story, a reason, a target for the feeling. The story and the feeling reinforced each other, and within minutes, the anxious body had an anxious narrative to match, and the anxious narrative had an anxious body to confirm it. The loop was running so fast that the beginning and the end were indistinguishable. And so you concluded, I am anxious, as if anxiety were a fact about your nature rather than a signal moving through a system that has not yet been witnessed clearly. The mechanics of this are not mysterious when you look at them directly. The nervous system is a pattern recognition and threat response machine of extraordinary sophistication. It is built for survival. It does not distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological threat with any reliability. A memory of humiliation activates the same threat response cascade as an actual physical danger. An imagined future disaster produces genuine chemical signals in the body that prepare it for conflict or escape. The mind creates the scenario. The body treats the scenario as real. And then the body's physical response creates a new layer of sensation that the mind then interprets as further evidence that the danger is real. You can spiral into significant distress over something that exists entirely inside the mind because the body cannot tell the difference between the map and the territory. This is where witnessing becomes not just a philosophical position, but a physiological necessity. When you begin to notice the thought and the sensation together, without immediately following the narrative wherever it wants to take you, something changes in the loop. Not because you have suppressed the feeling, not because you have argued yourself into a better state, but because the act of witnessing introduces a gap into the loop, a space between the trigger and the reaction. That space is not passive, it is alive. It is the moment where the automatic ceases to be automatic, where the pattern has a chance to be seen rather than simply repeated. And when a pattern is seen clearly, without being fed with identification, it loses some of its momentum. Witnessing the body is as important as witnessing the thought. When the inner critic speaks, notice not just the words of the criticism, but where the body responds. Where does the contraction happen? In the stomach, in the jaw, in the throat. What is the quality of the breath in that moment? These are not rhetorical questions. The body is carrying the thought as physical architecture. It is holding the pattern as tension, as posture, as restriction. And when you bring the witnessing awareness down into the body, when you stop chasing the narrative in the mind and begin to feel where the thought lives in the physical field, you are doing something the mental commentary cannot do from inside itself. You are observing the mechanism rather than being operated by it. There is a phenomenon that many people who begin any kind of contemplative or somatic practice describe. They notice that simply being present with a physical sensation, without needing it to go away, without building a story about what it means, without fleeing into mental analysis, simply being present with it, causes the sensation to begin to shift. Not always, not instantly, not through spiritual magic, but through the basic principle that energy that is witnessed rather than avoided does not need to escalate in order to be registered. The body was signaling. When the signal is received clearly by awareness, the signal does not have to keep amplifying. The tension in the chest is not a permanent structure. It is a moment in the field. Awareness meeting it directly changes its relationship to the system. The practical implication of this is significant. Witnessing is not only a position of philosophical detachment from thought. It is an active engagement with the full field of experience. Thought, emotion, sensation, and breath, all held simultaneously inside awareness without the need to immediately resolve or escape any of it. This is why genuine contemplative practices involve the body. Sitting, feeling the ground beneath you, feeling the weight and rhythm of breathing, not as distraction from thought, but as an anchor into the body of the witness itself. You are not a floating mind. You are awareness embodied in a nervous system. And that nervous system is a doorway into the witness, not an obstacle to it. The final and perhaps most important piece of the body-mind connection as it relates to witnessing is this. The body exists only in the present moment. The mind travels freely into the past and the future. It is most often not here, not in this moment, but somewhere else, replaying or projecting. The body, by contrast, is always here. It breathes here. It pulses here. Every sensation in the body is a present moment signal, and the witnessing awareness, the observer behind thought, also exists only in the present. When you anchor attention into the body, you naturally move toward the present. And in the present, the mental narrative about past failures and future disasters has less grip. The witness is a present moment phenomenon. The thinking mind is largely a time-traveling one. The body is the bridge between them. Here is the revelation this entire structure has been building toward, and it is smaller and more precise than you might expect. Freedom does not begin when thoughts stop. Thoughts will not stop. The mind generates thought the way the lungs generate breath. The rhythm may slow, the quality may refine, but the movement continues. And if you have been waiting for inner silence as the precondition of your freedom, you have been waiting for a condition that may never arrive in the way you imagined. That is not a dark conclusion. That is the door opening. Because freedom does not require silence. Freedom begins when identification weakens. Identification is the act of collapsing into the thought, of becoming the content so completely that no distance remains. Weakening identification means allowing a small gap to persist, not forcing it, not manufacturing detachment, simply allowing yourself to notice. This thought is here, and I am also here, and those two things are not identical. That gap does not make you cold or empty or spiritual in some performance way. It makes you honest. It makes you accurate. It allows you to engage with the thought, to feel its full weight if necessary, without surrendering the observer's position entirely. This is the micro-revelation. You are not trying to stop the voice. You are noticing that you are not the voice. You are not trying to destroy the anxiety. You are noticing that you are not only the anxiety. You are not escaping the mind. You are finding the edge of it, the place where the mind meets the awareness in which it lives. And at that edge, at that threshold, the entire quality of your inner life begins to shift. Not in one dramatic moment, in increments, in glimpses, in moments where you catch yourself about to fall entirely into a thought and you pause, just barely, and the witness looks at the thought instead of becoming it. The ancient traditions knew this. The contemplatives who mapped this territory over centuries knew it. The gap between thought and witness is not a grand spiritual achievement. It is a return to what was always there before the collapse. You do not build the witness through effort. You uncover it through attention. And the uncovering does not happen once, triumphantly, and then remain permanent. It happens again and again, in the ordinary moments of the ordinary day, every time you remember to look at what is looking, rather than at what is being seen. Consider the night spiral. You are lying in the dark, and the mind begins its movement. A conversation from earlier in the day returns, but this time the mind edits it, sharpens every edge, and creates the version of the exchange that serves the narrative of threat. Someone's tone becomes a deliberate insult. A moment of silence becomes evidence of rejection. And then the mind extrapolates. If that is true, then this other thing is also true. And if that is true, then the situation over here, which was previously ambiguous, now also becomes a problem. And the problems begin to connect, and the connections begin to suggest a pattern, and the pattern begins to feel like proof of something you have always feared about yourself or your life. And you lie there, convinced that the mind is doing the work of honest analysis, when what it is actually doing is generating a story in the dark and calling it truth. Consider the conversation replay. Something happened. A disagreement, a misunderstanding, a moment where you said the wrong thing or someone treated you in a way that felt unjust. And for hours or days or sometimes years, the mind returns to that conversation. It replays it with slight variations. It imagines what you should have said. It constructs arguments that would have won the exchange. It rehearses future confrontations. And every time you visit the replay, the body activates again. The chest tightens again. The old anger or shame moves through the system again, as if the event is still happening. As if the loop of thought has the power to keep the past alive in the present body, which, of course, it does. The thought is not a memory. The thought is a recreation. And if you are identified with it, you are living in a recreation of a moment that ended long ago. Consider the imagined future. The mind projects a scenario, a difficult conversation ahead, a possible failure, a threat that has not yet materialized, and it runs the scenario in enough vivid detail that the body responds as if the event were real. The heart rate shifts, the muscles prepare, the breathing changes, and you find yourself emotionally exhausted by something that has not happened and may never happen. You have spent genuine biological and psychological resources on a production the mind staged without your consent. And the cost of that production is measured in fatigue, in diminished presence, in the constant background hum of anxiety that many people eventually accept as normal, as just the way I am, not recognizing that what they are experiencing is the cost of being identified with a very active, very creative, and very unstable storytelling machine. Consider the inner critic. It speaks in a voice that sounds, in many cases, remarkably like the voice of someone from your early life. A parent, a teacher, a figure of authority who handed you a verdict about your worth or capability. And you have been carrying that verdict ever since, not as a memory, but as a resident commentary. It watches everything you do and offers its assessment. It grades your performance in real time. It finds the flaw before anyone else can. And because it has been speaking for so long, it has taken on the character of your own internal voice. You may not realize that you borrowed the criticism from outside and then installed it as an interior permanent resident. You may believe it is you being honest with yourself when it is actually an old signal running in new territory. Consider the confusion of mental noise with truth. This is perhaps the most pervasive pattern of all. The mind produces a thought. I am not capable. I am not lovable. I am running out of time. This will not work. I am falling behind. And because the thought feels urgent, because it arrives with emotional weight, because the body confirms it with a physical response, the thought is granted the status of truth. Not a thought, truth. And the difference matters enormously. A thought can be noticed. A thought can be held gently. A thought can be questioned, not through argument, but through the simple act of asking, is this what is actually happening? Or is this what the mind is generating in response to a fear it has been trained to carry? Truth does not require that kind of questioning. Only a thought does. Consider the identity built from accumulated mental content. Over a lifetime, the mind has generated countless thoughts about who you are, Many of those thoughts have been confirmed by emotion and sensation and then stored as settled conclusions about your nature. And you have gradually constructed an identity from the sediment of those conclusions. I am someone who cannot handle criticism. I am someone who always self-sabotages. I am someone who needs to be in control. I am someone who is always alone in the end. And this constructed identity then shapes every new experience. Because the identity acts as a filter. New information that confirms the identity is allowed through. New information that contradicts it is resisted or discarded. The system is self-sealing. The self-image is maintained by the very mechanism that created it, and the witness, the awareness that could see the construction clearly, has been absorbed into the construction itself. Consider how all of these patterns share a common architecture. They all involve a thought or a story arising inside the mind. They all involve the body responding as if the thought were a physical reality. They all involve identification collapsing the distance between the observer and the content. And they all involve, at some level, the witness going missing. Not because the witness ceased to exist, but because the noise became so constant, so convincing, and so familiar that the witness was forgotten. Not destroyed, forgotten. And what is forgotten can be remembered. What is covered can be uncovered. The witness was not waiting for you to build it. It was waiting for you to stop long enough to notice it was always there. And here is what makes all of this feel so personal, so close, so relentlessly immediate. These are not rare experiences happening to damaged people. These are the default operating conditions of the unexamined mind, the night spiral, the conversation replay, the imagined future, the inner critic, the confusion of noise with truth, the identity built from mental sediment. These are the standard features of a mind that has not yet been introduced to the witness behind it. You are not broken for experiencing them. You are simply operating without the map. And the map exists. It is old, it is precise, and you are looking at it right now. This channel exists precisely for the person who feels that something important is happening beneath the surface of everyday thought, and who wants to keep tracing that thread rather than lose it in the noise of ordinary distraction. If what you have heard so far is resonating, not just intellectually, but in some quieter place that recognizes what is being described, then this is the current you have been looking for. Every video on this channel moves deeper into this territory. Consciousness, identity, the hidden mechanisms of the mind, energy, the patterns that shape your inner life without announcing themselves. Subscribe now and do not let this moment of recognition scatter. The moment after a genuine inner insight is the moment the mind most aggressively reasserts itself, filling the space with distraction, doubt, and new commentary. Subscribing is a small act that says, I want to stay in this current. I want to keep going. There is more beneath what I have already seen, and I am willing to look. That willingness is not common. Hold on to it. The emotional cost of living fully identified with thought is not always visible until you step slightly outside of it. From the inside, it feels like reality. It feels like just being a person, just experiencing life, just dealing with the way things are. But the cost is real, and it accumulates the way debt accumulates, quietly, invisibly, until one day the weight of it becomes undeniable. The first cost is what might be called emotional slavery. When you are fully identified with every thought that arises, You are at the mercy of the most reactive, most fearful, most programmed layer of the mind. Every external event has direct and immediate access to your emotional state because there is no witness in the way. There is no gap between trigger and response. Every stimulus reaches directly into the identified self and moves it. And so you live, in a real sense, controlled by weather you did not choose and cannot predict. The second cost is what the witness would call false identity. You have built a version of yourself out of thoughts that were never truly yours to begin with. You inherited fears from your environment. You absorbed beliefs from authority figures. You took on the criticisms of people who were themselves operating from their own unexamined loops. And then you organized all of that borrowed material into a coherent seeming self-image and called it me. You defend it. You protect it. You sometimes destroy genuine opportunities because they require you to be different from the person the constructed identity says you are. And the deepest tragedy of this cost is not that the false self is unpleasant to live in. It is that, from inside it, you cannot always tell it is false. The third cost is self-sabotage. When the identity built from thought has decided that a certain kind of success, love, or freedom is not for you, when the inner critic has rendered a verdict, the system will organize behavior to confirm the verdict, even unconsciously, even against your stated desires. You will find reasons not to begin. You will find ways to exit situations that could lead somewhere the false self has decided is impossible. You will choose the familiar pain over the unfamiliar possibility, because the mind that is running the show has been trained to maintain the pattern, not to challenge it. This is not weakness of will. It is the automatic operation of a system that has never been witnessed clearly. The fourth cost is the inability to rest. When you are identified with thought, the mind must keep moving because movement is how it maintains the illusion of control. If the mind stops, if silence comes, if there is a moment without mental content to manage, the identified self experiences that silence as a threat, as emptiness, as the edge of something dangerous. And so the mind fills every available space with content, rumination, planning, analyzing, replaying, projecting. The person who cannot sit in silence for 5 minutes without reaching for a phone is not experiencing a technology problem. They are experiencing the terror of the identified self when it approaches the silence in which the witness lives. And because the witness is unfamiliar, the silence that hosts it feels threatening rather than liberating. The fifth cost is constant reaction. A life lived in full identification with thought is a life lived in reaction. Reaction to what other people said. Reaction to what the mind predicted. Reaction to the emotion that arrived before the thought was even complete. Reaction to the memory that colored the present moment with the emotional tone of an old wound. There is no genuine response, because response requires the gap of the witness. Response requires seeing clearly before acting. Reaction does not wait for sight. Reaction is automatic, conditioned, and fueled by identification. And a life organized around reaction rather than response is a life that rarely feels chosen, rarely feels aligned, and rarely leads toward anything that was not already encoded in the old pattern. The sixth cost, the one that runs beneath all the others like an underground current, is the steady erosion of presence. When the mind is constantly traveling to the past or the future, the present moment, the only moment in which life actually occurs, is largely abandoned. You are physically here, but experientially somewhere else. You move through the world in a state of partial arrival, touching the surface of what is happening while most of your attention is somewhere the mind has taken it. Relationships suffer, work suffers, the body suffers. And the extraordinary ordinary reality of being alive, with its texture and detail and depth, passes largely unnoticed. Not because life became dull, because the one who should be present has been dragged away by the noise of an unwitnessed mind. The reversal does not require destroying the mind, it requires repositioning it. For as long as you have been identified with thought, the mind has been functioning as the master and you have been functioning as the follower. Every thought that arrived was a command. Every fear was a directive. Every inner critic was a verdict handed down by an authority you never agreed to obey. The reversal is not rebellion against the mind. It is not suppression. It is not the violent silencing of mental commentary through force of will. The reversal is simpler and more radical than any of that. It is the recognition that the mind is an instrument, not a master, and that awareness, the witness, is the true position from which you engage with everything the mind produces. When the mind is repositioned as instrument, something immediately changes in the quality of the inner life. Thought does not disappear, but thought begins to function differently. Instead of every thought arriving as a command, thoughts arrive as offerings. They come forward, they present their content, and awareness receives them, evaluates them, and decides their relevance without being automatically governed by their emotional charge. The fearful thought is received and examined. Is this a real signal or a conditioned response? The critical thought is received and examined. Is this an accurate observation or an old borrowed verdict? The mind is still producing, but awareness is now in the position of the one who decides what to do with the production. This is what it means to be free from thought without being free of thought. The thoughts continue. The inner critic has not been fired. The tendency to project and replay and analyze does not vanish overnight. What vanishes, or rather, what loosens, is the automatic authority of those thoughts over your identity and your behavior. You can hear the critic without agreeing with it. You can notice the fear without becoming the fear's strategy. You can observe the spiral beginning and choose from the witness position not to follow it into its darkest predictions. Not by pretending the spiral does not exist, but by seeing it clearly enough to recognize it as a pattern rather than as the truth about this moment. The mind, repositioned as instrument, can then serve genuine purposes. It can plan, it can analyze, it can create. It can navigate complexity, solve problems, hold multiple perspectives, and generate language for the inner life. All of these are extraordinary capacities. The problem was never the mind's capability. The problem was the confusion about who was in charge. When thought believes it is the self, it governs everything, including the spaces that thought was never equipped to govern. Presence, rest, emotion, relationship, and the direct experience of being alive. When awareness reclaims its position as the ground rather than the content, the mind returns to what it does best, serving the full field of experience rather than dominating it. The reversal is also a reversal of the direction of attention. Instead of attention always moving outward into content, into thought, into narrative, into the external world as processed through the mind's conclusions, attention turns, even briefly, back toward its own source. This is what the ancient teachers called self-inquiry, not introspection in the psychological sense of analyzing your history. Something more direct than that. The simple act of asking, not intellectually, but experientially. Who is aware of this thought? Where does this noticing happen? What is the quality of the space in which thought appears? These questions do not produce verbal answers. They produce a shift in the direction of attention. And that shift, even when it lasts only a few seconds, is the practice of the reversal. What you are reclaiming in the reversal is not a new power. You are reclaiming the position you occupied before the identification became so total, before the noise became the ground, before the map was mistaken for the territory. Every human being has moments of witness, even without training. The moment of sudden clarity after a long confusion, the unexpected stillness that sometimes arrives in nature or music or grief. The pause before a decision where something deeper than habit speaks. These moments are not foreign. They are glimpses of what you always were beneath the layer that thought became. The reversal is not an arrival at a new destination. It is a return to the one that never left. The first inner practice is naming. When a thought arises, particularly a thought that carries emotional charge, instead of immediately following it into its narrative, you pause and name what is happening. Not the content of the thought, but the type. The mind is worrying. The mind is replaying. The mind is criticizing. The mind is predicting disaster. The simple act of naming the movement of the mind creates a minimal but real gap between you and the thought. Because the one who names is not identical to the thing being named. You are already in the act of naming, standing slightly outside the thought. This is not suppression. The thought is still there. But you have introduced a witness into the moment, and that introduction, done consistently, begins to reorganize the relationship between awareness and mental content. The second practice is watching without argument. When the inner critic speaks, when the fearful thought arrives, when the spiral begins, resist the immediate impulse to either surrender to the thought or argue against it. Both surrender and argument are forms of engagement that keep you inside the thought's frame. Instead, watch. Simply observe the thought as you would observe a cloud crossing the sky. You are not the cloud. You are not responsible for removing the cloud. You are not required to agree with the cloud or to prove that the cloud is wrong. The cloud is a passing formation in awareness. Watching without argument is the practice of allowing the thought to be fully present in awareness without allowing it to fully become you. The third practice involves returning attention to the body. When the mind has traveled far into abstraction, into the past, into the projected future, the body is always available as an anchor to the present moment. Feel the physical weight of your body in the space you occupy right now. Feel the specific sensations of breathing, the expansion, the contraction, the slight pause at the turn. Feel the temperature of the air on the skin. Feel the contact between your body and whatever surface it rests on. This is not a distraction from the inner work. This is the inner work conducted through a different instrument. The body is present when the mind has left, and presence is the natural habitat of the witness. The fourth practice is returning to silence, not the absence of thought. That kind of silence may or may not arrive, and pursuing it as a goal creates its own tension. But a deliberate, even if brief, withdrawal of attention from the content of thought and a resting in the awareness itself. You can do this for 10 seconds in the middle of a difficult day. You can do it sitting. You can do it walking. The practice is not duration, it is direction. The direction is attention turning from content to the container, from thought to the awareness in which thought moves, from the noise to the space in which the noise occurs. Even a momentary touching of that space changes the quality of everything that follows it, because you have briefly remembered where you actually are. The fifth practice is perhaps the most direct. Asking the question, not out loud, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a genuine interior movement of attention. When you are caught in a thought, when you are spiraling, when the identity built from mental content is asserting itself most aggressively, you can ask, who is aware of this thought? You are not looking for a verbal answer. The question is not designed to produce an answer. It is designed to shift the direction of attention, to turn awareness back toward its own source for just a moment. And in that turning, the identification with the thought naturally loosens. The question is the instrument. The loosening is the result. And the result does not require you to answer the question correctly. It only requires that you ask it genuinely. The sixth practice is patience with return. You will lose the witness, not once, hundreds of times a day probably. You will fall entirely into the thought. You will be inside the spiral before you realize the spiral began. You will be identified with the inner critic mid-sentence before the awareness catches up. And when you notice this, when you realize you were away from the witness position, that moment of noticing is itself an act of witnessing. The return does not require self-criticism about the lapse. It requires only that you return, gently, without drama, without adding a new layer of judgment to the moment. The practice is not maintaining the witness perfectly. The practice is returning to it when it is lost, which is a practice that never ends, and which, in its repetition, gradually changes the ground of the inner life in ways that no single moment of insight ever could. There is a final layer to this, and it is the one that most conversations about the witness never quite reach. People who begin practicing awareness, who begin working with witnessing, watching thoughts, naming patterns, returning to the body, asking who is aware, often arrive at a subtle new trap. They begin to treat the witness as something they have achieved, something they can access when they practice correctly, something they build or strengthen or develop through consistent inner work. And this understanding, while useful enough to begin the journey, contains a small but important error, because it places the witness on the same level as everything else that is developed through time and effort. And the witness is not on that level. The witness was never created. It was never absent. It has been present for every practice, every thought, every identity, every collapse into noise, and every moment of recognition. It is not the product of the journey. It is the one who noticed the journey from the beginning. Consider this carefully. Every time you practiced naming a thought, something was aware of the naming. Every time you returned to the body, something registered the return. Every time you fell back into identification and then woke up from it, something was watching the falling and watching the waking. That something was not constructed by your effort. It did not arrive after enough meditation. It was not earned through spiritual discipline. The witnessing awareness was the one who noticed the first breath of every morning, who registered every sensation of every childhood experience, who was present in the confusion of adolescence and the weight of adult grief and the moments of unexpected grace that arrived without explanation. The witness is not a destination. It was the one watching you look for it. This is the revelation that changes the texture of the entire search. You were not trying to build something. You were trying to notice something. And the noticing was always available, not as a reward for effort, but as the basic condition of experience itself. Without awareness, there is no experience. Without the witness, there is no observation of any kind. Every thought you ever had was witnessed by awareness. Every emotion you ever felt was felt inside awareness. Every identity you ever constructed was constructed in the presence of the one who could see the construction. The witness was not hiding. The witness was the one in whose presence everything else was happening. And identifying with the content, with the thought, with the emotion, with the built identity, was the one thing that made it seem as if the witness had gone missing. So the final revelation is this: you do not have to find the witness. You cannot find it the way you find a lost object, because it is not an object. It is the finder itself. You cannot reach it through practice the way you reach a destination through travel, because it is not a destination. It is the one who notices the traveling. What you can do, what every genuine inner practice ultimately points toward, is stop, briefly, repeatedly, and with increasing honesty, adding new layers of content between yourself and the silent awareness that has never been confused about what it is. The witness does not need to be built. It needs only to be recognized. And recognition, when it comes, does not feel like acquiring something new. It feels like remembering something that was never lost. There is one question worth sitting with before you move through the rest of today. Of all the thoughts that currently move through your mind, the criticisms, the fears, the predictions, the replays, the verdicts, which one are you most ready to stop obeying? Not to destroy it, not to silence it forever, simply to stop following it automatically, as if its arrival made its authority absolute. Write that in the comments. Name it. Let the witness speak it out loud in the space below this video. That act of naming, even in a public comment, is a small but real movement from inside the thought to outside it. And if you know someone who is trapped in the noise of their own mind, someone who cannot stop the spiral at night, who cannot leave an old conversation behind, who is exhausted by their own inner critic, share this video with them. Not as advice, not as a solution, simply as a signal that the witness is available, that the awareness behind the noise was always there, that the throne can be moved. Some people are waiting for exactly the right words to crack the right silence. This might be them. The voice in your head is still speaking. Even now, even after everything that has been laid out in this space, the mind is generating its response, its commentary, its assessment of what was said, its prediction about whether any of this will actually change anything. That is what the mind does. That is not a failure. That is not evidence that you missed something or that the witness is not available to you. The voice speaks. That has not changed. What has changed? Or what has the possibility of changing right now in this moment is who you believe the voice is. Because you heard the voice just now. You were aware of it. And the one who heard it, the one who was aware of it, was not the voice itself. You are not the noise. You are the silence that receives the noise. You are not the current of thought rushing through. You are the hidden current beneath it. The awareness that was present before the first word was spoken, that will be present after the last thought dissolves, and that is present right now, in this moment, quietly watching, undisturbed and completely intact. That is where you have always been. You just forgot to look.